Have you ever been told, oh, you just need to have faith, but have absolutely no idea what that really looks like? I'm going to unpack it for you in today's show. What if I told you that your fears aren't the opposite of faith? Rather, they're an opportunity to build your faith. My name is Tammy Rotzel from the website Footprints of Inspiration and a Faithful God podcast, where I teach women how to grow closer to God. No need for rigid schedules, no need for perfection, just a deep and meaningful lifestyle of connection with God. Over on the Grow Your Faith community this month, we are talking about facing fears, how to learn to choose peace over panic, how to deal with those what ifs in life, that self-doubt, and all the fears, the worry, and the stress. In today's show, I'm actually going to share with you 3 steps that you can take to actively face those fears and grow stronger in your faith in God. Now, we all deal with fear in our life. Every one of us has different types of fear that we deal with on a daily basis. Maybe it's fear of the unknown. Maybe it's fear of failure or never measuring up. Maybe it's that fear of losing control. Maybe it's rejection or change. Maybe it's fear of criticism or judgment, or being alone, that fear of isolation. Maybe it's fear for your children, that deep-seated fear for your children. Whatever type of fear that you are dealing with, I want you to understand that your fear clouds your view of God's faithfulness. Fear paralyzes you before you even begin. Fear speaks louder than the truth. Fear convinces you that you must figure it out on your own. It keeps you stuck in the what ifs instead of moving in faith. And fear magnifies the unknown and minimizes God's power. I don't have to tell you all of that. You know all those things, right? But so often those fears, we've been so used to living our life in fear that it's just become a part of us. Almost like we're wearing that fear like a blanket, like a cozy blanket. Actually, one of those itchy, cozy, heavy blankets, right? Because it doesn't feel good. It's not like it's warm and cozy and it's a place you want to sit. And yet all day long, we deal with fear. Here's the thing that I need you to understand. Your fear is 100% dependent on you for its survival. Did you catch that, my friend? Your fear is 100% dependent on you for its survival. That's a hard one, isn't it? And yet it's so incredibly true. We're allowing those fears when things start spiraling in our minds, right? When we start to spiral, and by the way, we all do it. We all do it. But when that happens, when we start to spiral, it paralyzes us, right? And all that does is feed that fear. We're causing that fear. We're feeding into that fear, allowing it to survive. And in today's show, I am sharing with you 3 ways that you can face those fears with more faith and trust in God. So when we're talking about the Bible and we talk about fear, this is more than just anxiety and worry. Fear actually is a deep-rooted threat to trusting God. It's a deep-rooted threat to our relationship with God. And I want you to remember that, because in just a moment, this is going to play into this in just a moment. But this is a deep-rooted threat to our connection, our relationship, our ability to trust in God. You know, all throughout the Bible, do not fear or do not be afraid. All of its variations is said to have been said 365 times in the Bible. That is for every day of the year. And why is that so incredibly important? It's because God knew what we would be facing here on earth. He knew that we would be surrounded by the enemy, that the enemy would be out to get us every single day. And you know, the enemy uses that tired old playbook, that playbook of self-doubt, of guilt, of shame, of isolation, all of those fears that we talked about earlier. That comes straight out of the enemy's playbook. It is such a tired, worn out playbook, but he does it because it works. We've got to understand God, we know that scripture is God breathed, right? We know that scripture is our blueprint for daily living on this earth. And because God knew how difficult it would be for us to face our fears every single day, to put up, right, that shield of faith, right? As in the armor of God. God knew how difficult that would be. So every single day, we've got a do not fear or do not be afraid for every single day of the year. Now, fear doesn't come from God. We don't serve a God that dishes out fear. No, that comes straight from the enemy. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, here's what it teaches us. Be well balanced, temperate, sober of mind. Be vigilant and cautious at all times, for that enemy of yours, the devil, roams around like a lion, roaring in a fierce hunger, seeking someone to seize upon and devour. You see, the enemy is prowling around every single day, every minute of the day, and he is going to use fear, self-doubt, guilt, shame, all of those things that we talked about, all of those that encompass fear. He is going to use them against us. He is going to use them to break that trust, right? Remember what I said earlier. Fear is a deep-rooted threat to trusting God. And the enemy knows it. And so he is going to battle us like he is fighting us every day, all day long. But I think so often where we get hung up over and over and over again, every single day, we get so hung up on the fact that we think that when we have fear, when we have self-doubt, when we have guilt and shame and isolation and that fear of never, being criticized and judged, we think that that means our faith is broken. We think that that means there's no way we could trust God, right? And that's exactly what the enemy wants us to think. That's exactly what he wants us to think. And so we've got to, right, trusting God, having faith in God, facing your fears is not a passive act. It is not you sitting on the sidelines and just crying, woe is me. It is not sitting there saying, you know what, I can't help it. I worry all the time. I stress about things. Yeah, we all do. But when we come into partnership with God, or when we have a relationship with God, we come into partnership with him, which means that we have to actively pursue him. We have to actively fight the enemy all day, every day. Is it exhausting? Absolutely, 100%. But the great thing is we don't have to do it in our own strength. We have the very power of God within us. Right? We have the Holy Spirit within us. That is the power, the very power of God who raised Jesus from the dead, the very power of God who parted the Red Sea, the very power of God who raised Lazarus from the dead, the very power of God who did all those miracles within the New Testament. We have that power within us. You see, so often we're trying to face those fears, trying to overcome those fears in our own strength. That was never the intention. That was never the intention, ever. No. God says in the Bible, do not be afraid, do not fear, for I am with you. He says, for I am with you. It's not about us. It's about learning to rely on him to face those battles. It's about learning to rely on him to face those fears. It's about learning to rely on him for the strength and the endurance to keep on fighting. We're not alone, my friend. We are not alone. God is with us every step of the way. So again, I just want to remind you, fear does not mean your faith is broken. It's an opportunity to build that faith. Stand on that truth, my friend. That's that little perspective, that little 1% perspective shift that we've got to make when we're following God. We've got to let go of those unrealistic expectations, and let go of what we think faith in God should look like. And instead, stand on what we know to be true, that we were never, ever meant to do this alone, that we were never, ever meant to have the strongest faith in the whole world in our own strength. It was always meant for us to rely on God for this. So let's take a moment to break down just 3 examples in the Bible that we can gain and 3 stories in the Bible where we can really learn from these people, right? These were ordinary men and women facing the same trials and challenges that you and I faced. And so it's really important that we understand these stories in the Bible to see that, you know what, you're not alone in your fears. You're not the only one dealing with self-doubt, with guilt, with shame, with that fear of isolation, with that fear of criticism and judgment. No, there are people, men and women, all throughout the Bible who did the same thing. So let's talk about them for just a moment. How about Moses? When God called Moses to deliver his people out of Egypt, and Moses didn't respond with great confidence. No, there was a lot of self-doubt that we saw from Moses. And we see in Exodus chapter 3, verse 10, God actually giving Moses that command when he says, "Now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people, Israel, out of Egypt." But here's what I love in the very next verse. The very next verse, here's how Moses responds. But Moses protested to God. "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people out of Israel, the people of Israel out of Egypt?" How many times have you thought, who am I to do that? But I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea how it's going to play out. Moses did the same exact thing. And then in the next verse, we see God's unconditional love for Moses when he says this to him. God answered, "I will be with you. I will be with you," right? So you don't have to worry about all this, Moses. I've got you. I'm going to have you go, but I'm going to be with you every step of the way. I'm going to part the Red Sea. Right? Moses had no idea that's what God was going to do. But you see, he was able to go not because he didn't have any fear. He didn't wait until all of his fears were gone. No, Moses stepped out in spite of that fear. Why? Because God promised him, "I will be with you." The lesson we learned from Moses is that God's power fills the gaps between faith and fear. And how about Esther, a young Jewish woman who was thrust into royalty at a time when her people were in danger? Now, when a plot was uncovered to kill the Jewish people, Esther had to face a very difficult choice. Either go, stay quiet and do nothing, do absolutely nothing, or go to the king and plead for them. Now, I want to be very clear about something. At that time, it's important to note that at that time, Esther, going to the king uninvited, that was something that when you broke that law, it was punishable by death. So she was facing a very real and difficult decision in her life. And in chapter 4, verse 16 of the book of Esther, she says, "Go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. If I must die, I must die." Esther faced her fears to stand up for her people, teaching us that courage often looks like trembling obedience. You see, we don't have to wait until we're no longer afraid before we step out. No, that's not what this is about. When we have these fears, when there are very real fears around us, we step out with trembling obedience, knowing that God is with us every step of the way. And then we have Peter, who boldly stepped out of a boat, right? Boldly stepped out of a boat with his eyes focused on Jesus to walk on water, to do the impossible, right? Can you imagine what Peter must have oh my goodness, right? But at that time, then all of a sudden a big wind comes and, the storm starts brewing. And what does Peter do? Every one of us has done again and again and again. He took his eyes off Jesus and started looking at the circumstances around us. How many times, if you are watching on YouTube, if you're watching the video on YouTube, drop yes in the comments below if you have ever done that. If you have ever taken your eyes off Jesus and focused more on your circumstances. Yeah. So often it's become a habit for us. It's become second nature because we've been doing it for so many years. We're giving into all those spiraling feelings, and we've been doing it over and over and over again, and it's second nature. So you can bet this, again, is not a passive thing. We don't trust God passively. We have to actively pursue him. There are things that we must do. What must we do in this particular lesson that Peter gives us? We've got to take our eyes off of our situation and put them back on Jesus. And let's just dig into Matthew chapter 14, verse 30 to see this play out. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Now, Jesus immediately reached out to Peter, and he says this to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" Peter shows us what happens when we take our eyes off of Jesus. We become paralyzed with fear. You see, we've got to intentionally set our minds on Jesus every single day. And on some days, right? Some days when those fears, when that self-doubt, that guilt, that shame, those thoughts are spiraling out of control, we have to do it over and over and over again. And let me be clear about something. You're going to get tired of doing it again and again and again. You're going to get frustrated of doing it again and again and again, of stopping, setting your mind back on God. You're going to feel like you're doing something wrong. You're going to get frustrated, like I just mentioned. But again, we've got to shift that perspective. This isn't a failure. It doesn't mean your faith is broken. What it means is you're actively pursuing God. And here's something, just kind of a side note here. I won't go too deep into this, but as you start walking this out, Satan will turn up the heat. We know that about him. He's going to feel threatened and he will turn up the heat. Okay, whatever, let him. He is no match for your God. He is no match for your God's power. You stop, you set your mind back on God, and you keep on going. Even in the frustration, even when it feels like you've done it 135 times already today, do it again. You see, what we have to do is we have to train ourselves. We have to create those new spiritual habits of immediately be like that, so that our knee-jerk reaction isn't panic, but instead it eventually becomes, I recognize it, we're going to turn it to God. The thing is trusting God is more than just words. It's a lifestyle of surrender. It's a lifestyle of surrender, of needing to know all the details. You don't have to know all the details and how it's going to play out because God's got it. He knows, right? So it's a lifestyle of surrender, of surrendering those fears, that worry, that need for control, right? All of those lies, surrendering them to God again and again and again. This is not a one-time act, as you're seeing, right? We don't surrender everything and say, okay, that's it. I'm done. High five. I'll meet you at the pearly gates, Jesus. No, that's not it. This is not a one and done thing. Learning and choosing to trust God requires us to do it again and again and again. It's daily. It's a daily lifestyle of surrender. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to share with you 3 steps you can take when those fears start to spiral out of control. But before I do, I want to invite you to hop on over and grab my free 7 no fluff ways cheat sheet to grow closer to God. These are 7 ways that actually help you grow closer to him. This isn't about creating more time in your day. I think so often, or one of the things that I hear so often from the women inside my community is, Tammy, I just don't have enough time, and I have every intention of spending time with God, but then the day gets away from me, and next thing I know, I'm crawling into bed, and I didn't do it again. I got you, my friend. I know how difficult that can be. But growing closer to God is not about creating all these extra things that you have to do throughout the day. It's about inviting him into your day. It's about creating a lifestyle of connection. And that's what this 7 no fluff ways to grow closer to God cheat sheet does. So hop on over to grab that free cheat sheet. It's footprintsofinspiration.com/grow closer. That's footprintsofinspiration.com/grow closer. I'll also put the link for it in the show notes for you below. So let's talk about those 3 steps, these 3 active steps that you can and should take every single day. Now, something I teach my students in the Grow Your Faith community is that we have to prep our environment. Just to listen to this lesson, that is not going to create a change in you. That's not going to do it, my friend. You have to put pen to paper. You have to actively pursue this. And so I'm going to teach you how to do that. One of the things, one of my favorite quotes from Benjamin Franklin is, when you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Did you catch that? Let me repeat that. When you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So what we're going to do is we're going to prep our environment so that when the thoughts start to spiral out of control, you will have stuff ready to go. You will be prepared, because what happens is your brain takes the path of least resistance. So when you start to worry, when that stress creeps in, your brain's going to automatically do what it's always done. What has it always done? Allowed those thoughts to spiral out of control. So we've got to break those habits, and create new ones. And the best way to do that is to prep before it happens, so that you have everything ready to go when it does happen. You're not going to remember every single time, and that's okay. That's okay. You're building these new, right? This is pumping that spiritual iron. You're building those new spiritual habits. So what are these 3 steps? It's recognize, reject, and replace. Let's take a moment to break down each one. Number 1, recognize. Identify where this lie is coming from. Now, I've mentioned it over and over again, where fear comes from, where all of this comes from, right? We do not serve a God who dishes this out. That does not come from him. This comes straight from the enemy. How do we know this? Because in 2 Timothy, chapter 1, verse 7, it teaches us God did not give us a spirit that makes us afraid. He gave us a spirit of power and love and self-control. Fear comes straight from the enemy. Remember, God put that, do not be afraid, do not fear, 365 times in the Bible for a reason, because he knew that Satan would be prowling around and you would have to fight that. So that's where it comes from. First and foremost is we've got to recognize, is this coming from God or is it coming from the enemy? Number 2, reject. Refuse to let panic and fear be your response. This is hard work, my friend. This isn't super easy to do. No, but you've got to refuse to let that be your response. The truth is, panic magnifies the problem, but peace magnifies God's presence and power. Now we see this play out in Mark chapter 4, where we see Jesus tell his disciples, let's cross to the other side of the lake. So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat and it began to fill with water. Now, I really want you to pay attention to this next verse and see take note of what Jesus was doing here. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" How many times, right? They actually responded with panic to this situation. Jesus wasn't worried. He was sitting in the back of the boat with his head on a cushion, sleeping away. Jesus wasn't worried. And yet the disciples responded with panic. And when we go down to verses 39, and 40, here's what we see. When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Suddenly the wind stopped, and there was a great calm. Then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" How many times have you responded with panic? Yeah, we do that all the time. We've got to remember that Jesus is sitting in the back of the boat with his head on a cushion, sleeping soundly. He's not worried. He's not up there wringing his hands, trying to figure out how this is going to work out. No, it's already been done. We've got to stop responding. We've got to reject, right? We've got to reject that lie and stop responding with panic. And number 3, replace. We want to swap those lies with God's truth. Name that fear. Name it, identify it, and then look up Bible verses that speak to that fear. Go into Google, do a quick Google search of Bible verses that speak into that fear, into that lie. And then write a Christian declaration or affirmation, Christian affirmation, speaking to that, right? Standing on God's truth. Now, what you want to do is you want to take that Bible verse, the one that resonated with you most, write it down on an index card. Then on the backside, put down a declaration or a Christian affirmation, right? You can declare things before you even see them. That will be an episode for another time, but we will talk about declarations. But what you want to do is declare healing. You have the power of God within you. As a daughter or son of Christ, you have that ability to declare something before it comes to fruition. So declare it, or write down that Christian affirmation so that when it happens, right, tuck it in your pocket. When it happens, what you're going to do, you're going to recognize, you're going to reject it, and you're going to replace it with God's truth. This is an active process. This isn't just doing it in your head and then what's going to happen a couple of hours later, something's going to happen and you're going to totally forget about it. That's why we prep our environment. That's why we do it now, so that when it happens, we can go right to that index card. So when the fears creep in, when you realize that your thoughts, those anxious thoughts, are spiraling out of control, recognize where they're coming from, reject it, and refuse to respond in panic. And then number 3, replace it with God's truth. And again, put it on an index card. I do this when I go to work on Mondays. I actually write either a Bible verse, a word, a declaration, or a Christian affirmation on a Bible verse, so that when the day gets crazy, right? Because it always does. When it gets crazy, I can set my mind. I don't even have to pull it out. Sometimes I will. Sometimes I'll pull it out. I'll read it. I'll stop, breathe God in, right? Those breath prayers. I teach that inside the Grow Your Faith community, as well as Confident Prayer Warrior. But we do those quick breath prayers, right? And with those breath prayers, we're setting our mind on God. We're breathing in His peace and breathing out those anxious thoughts, right? And so we actively do these things. One of the things that I think is just so important to understand is, these lessons, any lesson that you get, biblical lesson that you get, is so incredibly important, but it's only the first step. It's only one step of a 3-step process. The other 2 steps are just as important as that first step. Yes, you've got to learn about these lessons. Yes, you need to know what the Bible says. But it's not enough to stop there. You've got to apply these lessons in your own life. And how do you do that? By actively writing those fears down, by actively seeking out Bible verses and writing those down, by actively creating those declarations, or writing those declarations, and declaring them, by the way, and Christian affirmations. And then the third step to that is understanding what it really feels like, understanding what it really looks like, so that you don't feel like you failed or that you could never measure up as a Christian because you feel like your faith is broken. That's not true. That's not reality. No, the reality is Satan prowls around and we have to be on guard at all times, not passively, but actively. So turn your panic into prayer, my friend, and use those 3 steps in order to do that. So my friend, I'm going to hold you accountable. I want to hear from you. If you are watching on YouTube, drop in the comments below and tell me what fear. I want to hear from you. Tell me the fear. What is your fear? And by the way, this is a no judgment zone. What you're going to find is, as you are vulnerable enough to put your fears down there, I promise you, there are hundreds of other people feeling that exact same way. You are not alone, so there's nothing to be afraid of. Plus, like I said, this is a no judgment zone. So what I want you to do, drop your fear, drop down the Bible verse you're going to stand on, and either a declaration or a Christian affirmation. These are the things we do inside the Grow Your Faith community, because when we take and we put these things into action, that's when we step into the deep waters with God. That's when we stop sitting on the sidelines and just kind of listening to all the lessons. We actually go into the deep waters and we start to experience that spiritual growth and transformation. We start to, our faith starts to grow, our trust in God. We learn how to rely on Him more fully. Now, if you're listening on your favorite podcast player, then be sure to send me a message. DM me over on Facebook, or send me an email at tammy@footprintsofinspiration.com and let me know what those are. Again, write down your fear, write down the Bible verse that you are going to use to stand against and reject that fear, and replace it with those with either a declaration or a Christian affirmation. Now, my friend, I've actually over on the blog created a blog post with 5 examples of overcoming fear in the Bible, of facing those fears in the Bible. 5 more examples, plus I dig in a little bit more with the examples that we talked about today. So if you'd like to dig in more, hop on over to footprintsofinspiration.com/161. That's footprintsofinspiration.com/161. Now, I've got an entire series about having faith in God. I'm going to put up, or in the show notes below, and for those of you watching on YouTube, I will put it up on the screen right now for you, the Faith in God series. I've got an entire 4-part series. Hop on over, make sure you listen to that. That's going to really help you learn to trust God more fully, to face those fears. It's not about overcoming them entirely. No, because we never will. It's about learning to face them, right? With that trembling obedience that we talked about earlier. So I pray this blessed you today, my friend, and then I will meet you back here in the next episode.